welcome to the Earth Keepers podcast. This podcast is for people who seek new and better ways to love and care for the earth. It's a podcast for anyone who is deeply concerned about the harm being done to the environment on a local and global level. It's a podcast that builds community and connection between people of like heart and mind, people who believe that earth care should be integrated into every aspect of life, and for many in the Earth Keepers community, that includes our spiritual lives. In this special episode, we'll be in conversation with Brian McLaren about his book called Do I Stay Christian? A Guide for the Doubters, the Disappointed, and the Disillusioned. I'll be co-hosting with Victoria Loorz of the Wild Church Network and Kate Davis from the Center for Transforming Engagement at the Seattle School. Together, we'll pay particular attention to Brian's ideas about something he calls rewilding. As he describes it in his book, rewilding is all about realigning and reorienting our hearts, minds, and bodies with the natural world. Rewilding is about reconnecting to the earth as our teacher and seeking the wisdom that is found in wilderness. Welcome, friends, to the Earth Keepers podcast. Well, greetings, everyone. Welcome to Wisdom from Wilderness, Rewilding Theology for the Future of Faith. This webcast is co-sponsored by Earth Keepers Podcast, the Wild Church Network, and the Center for Transforming Engagement at the Seattle School. My name is Forrest Inslee, host of the Earth Keepers Podcast and Associate Director of Circlewood, an organization committed to accelerating the greening of faith. My co-hosts and I will be in conversation with Brian McLaren about his newly released book called Do I Stay a Christian? A Guide for the Doubters, the Disappointed, and the Disillusioned. Welcome, Brian. We really appreciate you taking the time to hang out with us tonight.
I have been looking forward to this. So glad to be with you all, and so glad for all the folks who wanted to be part of this tonight.
Let me also introduce a friend and colleague and now co-host, Kate Davis. Kate, for our listeners tuning in from all over the world, please tell us a bit about what it is you do day to day.
Yeah, thanks. I'm Kate Davis. I have a ministry background, and currently I serve as the director of the Center for Transforming Engagement. The center equips leaders to develop spiritual resilience and to transform relationships in their congregations, their organizations, ultimately with the aim to help their communities become places of social and ecological resilience. The center is also the home of Christ in Cascadia, which is an online journal that amplifies stories of innovative Christian practice and community that is particular to the U.S. Pacific Northwest and Western Canada. That's all about me.
And Victoria, can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Victoria Loorz, and let's see, all of my work the past several years have been in helping people to make that reconnection between their spirituality and the rest of the alive natural world. So I'm the co-founder of Seminary of the Wild, which does pretty much what it sounds like, and the co-founder of the Wild Church Network, which is a network of hundreds of churches all over North America and other places around the world that are bringing people into deeper relationship with the natural world and creating spiritual practices that reconnect us back into a place of belonging. And also the author of a book, Church of the Wild, How Nature Invites Us into the Sacred.
So, Victoria, I'm hoping that you will ask Brian the first question, since you actually know him.
Right into it.
That's right.
Brian, thank you so much for being here. I was lucky enough to get a early copy of your new book, which is going to become a required reading for Seminary of the Wild participants, because most people in my bubble, at least, are asking this exact question. And so I wanted to just begin to just give you an opportunity to share a little bit about why this book at this time was so urgent and important.
Well, Victoria, I think you and folks who'd be tuning in who have a sensitivity to the natural world will understand why so many people who are affiliated with the Christian religion are just wondering whether that investment of time and energy is whether it's unproductive and therefore not worth continuing, or whether it's actually counterproductive and a moral necessity to withdraw from. Because so much of the Christian religion is still focused on escaping the earth and is focused on treating the earth kind of like a candy wrapper. The important thing in it is souls that will be, sucked up to heaven after death. And really just the entire universe and all its intricacy is either a distraction or just non-recyclable garbage, really. And this sort of love of the spiritual world and disdain for the natural world, or this love for eternity and disdain for history, I think we just realize we can't afford it, or those of us who understand the peril that we're in know that we can't afford it anymore. So there are a whole lot of people who are thinking about leaving and who have left and all the rest. And I did not want to write a book to persuade them to stay, because they have really good reasons to leave. But I'm also aware that the people who decide to leave have to wake up the next day and they're still in the same world that's in the same kind of peril. And then they realize that those people who still identify as Christians are part of the religion that has the most power to make things worse or potentially make things better. So at the end of the day, in many ways, it's because of the reality that I wake up with every day, that many of us do, that the entire human race, virtually the entire human race, at least all those in power, have to discover a new way of relating to this earth of which we're part. And that is a deeply spiritual work. And so the ecological transformation that I think is deeply needed in the Christian faith is really one of the messages and purposes of the book.
This is the time, isn't it? Spiritual leaders are just so needed.
Exactly right. And there are few things. I just can't think of another historical necessity that has the kind of consequences of inaction that this one does. And so I think we all, those of us who are awake and aware, feel this. And those of us who have a Christian background are also aware that there are plenty of resources in the Christian faith that have fueled the kind of destructive attitudes that we currently see. But there are even more resources that could do the opposite. And so you all are people, and I'm someone who we're trying to rediscover and redeploy those assets.
Yeah. It is a remembering, isn't it? Go ahead,
yes.
Kate.
Yeah.
Well, part of what I hear you saying is the dilemma of hope, and especially hope that's collective, hope that's in institutions. I love the title question, that do I stay Christian? It's one that we hear so often at the Center for Transforming Engagement. People have told us that we're the last stop on the express train out of Christianity. Yes. And if they are going to find a way to stay in the church and make it work for them, it's going to be here. Otherwise, they're gone. And what you're describing is if on the one hand, there's so little hope that people just want to be done with it, want to say, I don't identify with Christian anymore. Yeah. On the other hand, when you do that, when you abdicate, you lose the ability to influence the institution for the positive change that you want to see. And that question of hope, which really is, I think, what people come to us looking for, of how do I have enough hope to stay in this work, but not so much that I'm going to be heartbroken in it. And of course, you're going to have your heart broken in it. But I'm curious, for you, what sustains that hope for the future of the church, enough to at least keep the question an active question? Like you said, you didn't want to write the book going in, but you also don't want to write the book leading out. So what sustains your hope for the future of the church?
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting. I am very sympathetic with the theologian Miguel de la Torre, who has really problematized hope in recent years. And I think a huge part of his motivation is the issue of race, that when you see, especially in this country, but in the predominantly white sectors of Christianity, when you see just the stupidity and the refusal to face realities of race, there's a certain kind of hope that feels it's not just that it's unrealistic, it's an enabling that almost the religion needs people to say we think you're hopeless, and because they aren't giving us evidence to have hope, and I think there's a way to feel the same way about the environment, but here's the problem: once you have that kind of hope, that loss of that kind of hope, if it leads you to despair, then you do nothing, and the despair that does nothing is remarkably similar to the complacency that does nothing. And so this is why, I love what Greta Thunberg says about this. She says, I don't want you to have hope. I want you to panic because the house is on fire. And that actually leads me to a deeper definition of hope. And here's what it is. Hope for me is when I reach the commitment to do something, whether or not it will succeed, whether or not it feels like it will succeed. So where I disconnect my commitment from the likelihood of successful results. And here's the irony about this, that if you give up when the results don't look likely, then you increase the chances that nothing good will happen. If you keep doing the right thing, irrespective of the current likelihood of successful results from your perspective, you infinitely increase the chances that things could go better, because your action and your involvement could be a critical factor. So I don't know if that helps, Kate, but I just think this question of hope is really important, because despair has a whole set of unintended consequences, but a naive hope that only looks for encouraging evidence, I don't think is a strong enough hope.
Yeah,
for what it's
worth.
I
hear you calling us to the more foolish hope. It's not. I mean, the way you spelled out, I'm like, oh, that is so logical, but the action of it looks foolish to someone who's trying to behave more rationally.
One of the things that has got me thinking this way is looking back in history. In the book, I do these several kind of fast surveys in history, and those are fast to write. But if you want it to be anywhere near accurate, they're fast to read, but they're very slow to write, because you really have to think through what you're saying, especially when you do kind of big historical sweeps. But one of the things that really hit me as I was writing is there are so many issues in history. If you pick a year, if you were to pick, for example, the early 1600s, where there's this orgy of witch burnings in so many parts of Europe, and of course, some of them came to North America too. And you think, if you stood up against the witch burnings, looking back in history, you would not stop them. They're still going to keep happening. So if you go back and say, how do I wish I would have acted in history? Well, it wasn't going to work. So I don't think I would have spoken up in 1610. I would have waited till 1810 to speak up, right? That makes no sense to me. What I want to say is, I would like to have been the kind of person who would have done the right thing, even though in my lifetime, the results might not have been anything I would have been happy about. And you can take issue after issue, and you realize that we hear about the people who were lucky enough to care at the time when the conditions were right to change. But those conditions wouldn't have been right to change if there weren't generations of people who cared when it seemed like their caring produced nothing. It produced something. The existence of their caring helped change the conditions later on.
Not only that, the idea of success, the idea of win, is part of that old paradigm. And so keeping our eyes upon that keeps us in that old way of thinking.
I really think so. And it becomes clearer when you face the deeper problems that are monumental. I mean, this is one of our problems, that an unintended consequence of capitalism, the profit motive and the nonprofit industrial complex, because in a profit-driven society, even a nonprofit venture finds it almost impossible to raise money unless they can scale down the challenge that they're addressing to the size of something that produces results that can be trumpeted to raise more money. Now, I'm glad for people raising money for every good cause, but I just think we have to see there are causes that will never raise the money they need based on that whole economy. And I don't know everything to do about that. I just feel, though, that my own thinking, I'm 66 years old, and I feel like I'm just beginning to wake up to the power that money has on my own thinking and limits it has on my own imagination, and how the valuation of money and the sort of medium of money, it just affects my values in ways I'm just barely waking up to.
It's so core to everything. We keep being surprised, right?
And this is where faith and spirituality becomes so important. In one sense, you say the world of spirituality, the world of faith should be the one place where we experiment with values that are not based on an economic system.
Should be.
Yes.
Brian, I want to follow up on this theme of transformation. Both Circlewood and Earthkeepers podcast are committed to helping people understand that Earth Care has everything to do with faith life. We believe that a reorientation to creation is inevitably going to mean that our faith practices and faith communities are going to be changed. Yes. But while Circlewood is committed to helping folks work for reform from within the traditional church, we also encourage people to imagine new expressions of faith community outside of the church.
Yes.
I'm wondering, when you think about the future of the church, do you have more hope for changing the system from within, or are you more hopeful about experimental movements happening outside the mainstream?
Oh, I love this question, because the first thing it requires me to say is this happened. This is one of the other ways that writing this book changed me. The term "the church" has virtually no meaning to me anymore, because what's absolutely clear to me, I don't know if other people will agree, but I can just tell you from where I stand, this is obvious. Opposite things happen under the name of the church. Mm-hmm. Absolutely opposed things. So in the name of the church, refugees are taken in and cared for and given dignity. And in the name of the church, refugees are turned away and treated as subhuman. In the name of the church, guns are melted down and turned into garden implements. And in the name of the church, people celebrate more and more guns. Every single issue I can think of, the church does opposite things. And so what I encourage people to expect, because I think this is realistic, I think under auspices of the church will get worse and worse and worse. I think things that are identified as the church, we should expect they are not anywhere near their bottom. And I think we should just expect they will get worse. And so to come back to your question, then the places that are willing to change and that are open to change, how do we do that? And here's what I would say. I think you're naming exactly the two right zones. There's an area of working within the church, and then there's an area of saying, we don't have time for those slow changes. We have to go outside of work here. Because here's my little motto. I think institutions imitate, and movements and other kinds of creative activities innovate. I think it's very rare for an institution to innovate. It needs to see a movement of people who didn't need to wait for permission and funding, who go out and innovate. And so the innovation stimulates the imagination for imitation, and they both go together. And that's why I'm really glad that you all are acknowledging and encouraging both of those. It's very easy for people in both of those categories to despise each other. Why aren't you joining us in this innovation outside the institution? This is where the action is. Why aren't you coming back and helping us make change here? This is where the power is. They're both right. And I think what would be smarter is for us to say, I am putting 100% of my effort in this area, or I'm putting 80-20 in these two areas. I'm glad other people have different proportions, because we need people wholeheartedly working in both areas. And I also think, to return to the first thing I said, that we also need to look at people. I hesitate to use this language, but it's language Jesus used, to let the dead bury the dead, to let people who want to walk away when they say they're not interested in what we're saying, to say, God bless you, and shake the dust off our feet and get on with our work where people are ready for the work to be done.
You know, I want to emphasize the differences you're pointing out. I think in some ways the title question of your book is received differently depending on where you're positioned. I mean, I think about, that question, do I stay Christian? Probably a lot of people relate to that in great part because they have a background of being Christian.
Yes.
But I think about people in my daughter's generation. She's 19, right? Yes. And the question is different for her. The question is, what is this Christian thing that's, inviting me to be part of it? And if not that, then what? And I know that that she really struggles with that question because she comes at it from a really different place than I do.
I'm so glad you say that. It brings to mind a friend of mine had just gotten his dissertation, and I said, "What was your dissertation about?" And he said it was about first century Judaism. And I said, "What did you learn?" He said, "There's no such thing as first century Judaism." He said, "There are first century Judaisms," and when we go back and call them one thing, we're obscuring the fact that they did not consider themselves one thing. And I think that's the reality that younger generations face. They are growing up seeing these opposite faces, this sort of Janus-faced reality, or it's even more than this multi-faced reality that seems to have different, that everything about them is different. And that's the reality that we face. And so in a certain sense, though, that's also true of almost every other entity I can think of, every other social reality, America, Britain, India, China. They can mean opposite things at the same moment, and people are moving in opposite directions. And this is just part of the reality of this time that I think if we can get clarity about that, it will help us. So what that means for me is, especially when I think about this move toward a reconnection with the earth, a re-earthing of God, a change in our very understanding of who we are as children of the earth. All of these changes, what I realize is if this is happening to me and if it's happening in you, and we can invite other people who feel drawn in this direction to celebrate it and discover it and embody it in institutions, embody it in movements, embody it in communities, embody it in art every way we can. That's the very best thing we can do for all those people who don't get it yet, because they won't be able to get it until they see it embodied. And they may never get it, but the fact that it exists for their children the next generation might be the ones who get it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I feel like where we are right now is putting into practice what generations of eco-theologians or theologians thinking on the edges have been saying for, at least 50 years. Really, it's been along the edge the whole time. But this is a time we're really putting it into practice. We're starting to live it, find new structures, new ways to embody this remembering ourselves back into the whole.
It's interesting that, for me and all of us, who are white, this is a time when I think we realize the fact that this looks so hopeless to us is because to the degree that we've been raised as part of the white elite and the white power structure, we are aware of how deeply embedded so many of these misconceptions and dangerous notions are. But one of the things that helps me, Victoria, having that longer time frame and seeing things with a longer arc, is to say, I think of an African-American friend of mine who has been digging deeply into her ancestry. Mm-hmm. And so she thinks about one of her ancestors who lived in early 18th century Maryland, and who knew she was a human being, and who knew she had dignity, and who knew that the dominant structures around her did not believe that. And she didn't have in her mind any idea that she had to wait for them to understand her humanity for her to start living out her own humanity. Mm-hmm. And I think this is one of I take inspiration from that, that we just have to live it and believe it and not be surprised that there are a whole lot of people who are literally being paid not to understand it.
Yeah.
And who are literally being punished if they begin to understand it, because there are centuries and centuries of momentum to keep these old structures in place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're not just, when you mentioned before the nonprofits and all of the work that we're trying so hard to do, like we are alive at this time of great unraveling and great emergence. Like all of us are here now. At this moment, it's a really important moment. And how do we honor what has brought us to now, our ancestors, as well as, anyway, it's a time to be alive. That is, that's kind of scary, but also can be, we're standing on the shoulders of generations of people who on the edges were oppressed.
Yeah.
And everything we can do to bring their voices and, into the center, learning from their resiliency is what we all need. I wanted to ask a comment on something that's a little bit different than what we've been talking about, but, sort of in gratitude, there's a couple of lines in your book, where you say seminaries around the world are offering courses and even whole degrees and other certifications to help us rewild our faith. I'm especially grateful for the good people of Seminary of the Wild, described as a wild seedbed of spiritual and cultural evolution. So I just want to say publicly thank you for that nod, and I wanted to ask if you've been experiencing that in other places as you've been talking about. You've been talking about this rewilding stuff for a while.
Yeah.
And, I sort of live in this bubble where people are awakened and listening to this call from Spirit and from Earth herself. But I'm wondering so it feels to me that there is an awakening, a sort of big awakening at that fulcrum. And just wanting to see what you've been, noticing, hearing, what are the kind of work in innovative seminaries and that kind of what's going on?
Yeah. Well, I see quite a bit, and I'm sure there are people who see a lot more than me. So when I speak of anything here, the fact that I'm sure I missed a lot, I don't want to insult anybody, but let me say, I think in the world of the academy, in the world of scholarship, there really is important scholarly work to do that some people might write off and say, oh, that's just academic, that's just ivory tower. But I think that is one of the places where we unscrew the bolts of a current suicidal machinery. And those bolts get unscrewed, and that's necessary to make some new things possible. And new formulations start to get articulated. And this is happening. I mean, I think that probably the living theologian I quote the most in the book is Ilia Delio, a Franciscan nun who, she's bringing important discussions from evolutionary biology into the world of theology, and from process philosophy into the world of theology. And this is really important. It begins to make a shift. I think of someone like Corinna Gore and the work she's been doing at Union Seminary. And Union Seminary has been a leader both in the area of taking race as a super important category of theology and taking the environment as a super important category. And I mean, I won't remember names, but I think of a friend of mine who's enrolled in a seminary in Ohio where ecology, they've made a commitment that issues of ecology and our relationship with the earth are across the curriculum, that this is something, they don't want there to be one course in this. They want this to be integrated in every area of the curriculum. So I think it's happening in the academic sense all over the place. I'll tell you where I feel there's a gap. And that is that when a seminarian gets inspired about this, and then they show up in a church and the church doesn't want to hear it for a whole bunch of reasons. Or when they say, how can we embed this in song? And we just haven't had the and we have some people beginning to write the music that we need, but we need like a renaissance of music that celebrates the earth, and that celebrates, when we say the word God, we aren't celebrating the distant, invisible patriarch supreme being, but we're celebrating the logos, the Tao, the Tao that's in creation, and that's revealed not best in a book, but in the face of a compassionate and just man, a human being. So all of that, we have so much work that needs to be done. How we rewrite, like, I don't think we have, I'll just be honest, every single Sunday that we keep the same liturgies going, we're wasting another precious Sunday. So we just need this kind of work to be, to be accelerated. But thank God for the really important scholarly work that's happening. And that will, I know it will eventually filter into these other areas. I just want to, encourage that.
Yay. And just to be clear, Seminary of the Wild is experiential. We do read some books, but it's all about experiential and being connected directly in relationship with the land. When there's a theological question, bring it to the land, bring it to the rivers, bring it to the stars.
And can I say that is one of your really unique contributions? And isn't it interesting to imagine how that would affect theological education and spiritual education if we took that experiential dimension more and more seriously? And I just think we are at the beginning of a revolution. This is over 20 years ago. I wrote a couple paragraphs that a whole bunch of seminaries have asked me to talk about. It was in a book I wrote called A New Kind of Christian. And I said that I thought the seminary of the future should be one part seminar, one part monastery, and one part mission agency. And what I meant by that is that the one part seminar is sort of the book oriented part of this, and lecture and discussion and all that. Although seminars are different in that the student it isn't just being spoon fed information, but has to go dig up information. Yes, exactly. But the monastery part is where there are practices in community. And the mission agency part is where you go out in the world and get your hands dirty in the work of justice and compassion. And so it would be 2/3 experiential learning. And when you think about the importance of the wild to that curriculum, it really becomes interesting to think what education will be. And I don't doubt that we're going to see more of it. I think you all are leaders, which is why I wanted to, celebrate your work. But you just think of how far we could go. It's breathtaking. Yeah.
Thank you.
To the piece of, really both monastery and mission in there, and just how embodied those pieces are, that what we do in Christian practice is really with our bodies. And when I was reading your chapter on rewilding, you have this beautiful sentence on needing to make peace with our wild bodies. And you're calling out Christians specifically there. And I realized that all of the examples that came to mind in my world for making peace with what it means to be embodied, well, not all, many of them are from the not Christian world. Yeah. And I was wondering if you had a story that might help us imagine what making peace with our wild bodies looks like in our own faith communities.
Well, what's interesting to me is, first, how many people go to church, but yoga has become an increasingly important part of their life, and how they know they might not be able to talk about it too much to some people at church, but these little secret networks form. And I will be interested to see, as a kind of theology of yoga and a theology of Tai Chi, where what I mean by this is where people who are committed Christians will say, let's talk about our experience in and of our bodies in those kinds of practices. And let's talk about this. My daughter is a gifted yoga teacher, and I was with her in a yoga class not long ago, and someone said, the point isn't touching your toes. The point is what you learn on the way down. I just thought, there's something about the experience of inhabiting your body here where real transactions are happening and real breakthroughs are happening. And so that would be one whole area. But I do think it's so interesting. This has been there in the gospel the whole time. We don't often talk about it this way, but Jesus went on a 40-day vision quest to begin his public ministry. And we talk, I think it's unfortunate that we use the word wilderness in the Bible to mean a desert and a dangerous, inhospitable place. I think there's another way to say Jesus went to school of the wild for 40 days, just as I think it's appropriate to say that the children of Israel were oppressed by an inhumane human construction, the pyramidal economy of Egypt, the slave economy of Egypt. And what God does is liberates them and puts them in the natural world for a generation, as if to say, if you want to learn how to be a human again, you have to start by camping. You have to start by living in relation to the elements and living. We've got to go back and start over, in some way. And I know a sort of woo-woo romantic way people can hear this. People may think of it that way. That's not the way I mean it. I mean this in the sense that we are experiencing as a civilization, that we're having to unlearn almost every single thing we do in our economic system and relearn biomimicry so that we stop thinking that trash is a natural and acceptable byproduct. Because nature doesn't produce trash in that sense. It doesn't. We could just go on with example after example. But that you just think, what would it mean for us to say that there is a learning that you can only experience by extended time in engaging with the wild world? Yes. That it's the experience of standing in the middle of a thunderstorm where there's nowhere to hide and you also could be killed at any second. That does something to you that you maybe can experience in no other way. And I guarantee you can experience it through reading a book. And that experience may be a necessary part of what it means to become a human being, a mature, well-balanced human being fit to live in this world. And that is not just the experience of dread or smallness or fragility. There's also the experience of delight and joy and dignity and wonder. And is it David Lanham, the poet biologist? He calls it orgasm, that we need to have an orgasm, an explosion of the delight of awe, in the natural world.
But it feels like it's the only way through this crisis. It's not going to be that we're going to figure it out. Like, yes, we need the technologies. Yes, we need, to redo systems. Yes, systems need to come down. But I think our only way through is to listen to the sacred reality that is in between all things, in between all things. Like honestly, we need to learn how to listen once again, as most humans through most of history have had that access.
And that's recognizing that listening is also in our bodies. I love, Brian, that you went from yoga to nature to this list of emotions, and emotions are also in our body. We think of them as something else, but they're physical experiences.
And of course, this means the traditional Christian understanding of sex has just been obsessed with what you're not allowed to do. But what would it mean for us to talk about sex as the wildness of our bodies that's a reflection of God that has to be rediscovered in a healthy way? We've had this generations of purity culture and centuries and centuries of body shaming and body hatred that had so much animosity, especially to the female body. But there was a sort of self-hatred in male sexuality too. And you just think, where could we be if we, if we're on at a moment where all of this could be looked at in a fresh way? Or you think something that's near and dear to my reality is the bodily experiences of aging. And today I'm not in my home. I'm actually in the office of my brother-in-law who passed away a few days ago, and so I'm here for his funeral. And the bodily reality of death, I just feel so much of Christianity has been this attempt to shortcut death rather than to understand death as part of wildness. Death is part of embodiedness. And we're so interested in solving it as a problem before we allow it to become our teacher, and to see it in some way as, well, let me just say, we have a huge amount of work to do there, because the Christian religion made its specialty in cheating death, when I just think when you deny death, as to use a phrase from a very significant and important book, a whole lot of sickness results. So our bodies have so much to play. And I think that's especially important when we realize that a whole lot of people, because of racial history and because of economic policy, will never be able to experience wildness the way I can, because I can afford a plane ticket or a car ride to someplace. But so there are dimensions of this that will be brought to different people in different ways. Some of us will be the frontline explorers in this in different areas, and we'll have to bring it back in translatable ways to everybody. And eventually, I think it will become embodied in the words of our theologies, and in the conceptual frameworks of our theologies, and in our hymnody, and in our rituals, which already have a pretty big body element. If we take things like communion, which is an eating ritual, right? Or baptism, which is some combination of a bathing ritual or a birthing ritual. These are very embodied experiences.
Picking up on something that Victoria said, she said the word forgotten, that we've forgotten how to be present in our bodies. We've forgotten how to be grounded. We've forgotten even how to listen to God revealed all around us. But I like the hope that you offer in your book. You also say we've forgotten this, but this condition of having forgotten is not natural to us.
Yes.
Like, we are different people. We should not be this way.
Yes.
And so I think that's what your rewilding idea is all about, is we need to get back to that place where we can learn to remember, learn to recover wisdom, I guess, recover old ways that are more inherently human.
Yes. Yes.
I especially like to comment in the rewilding chapter that you made about Indigenous folks. Let me read a quote to you and ask you about this. The descendants of colonizers, you write, are finally turning to Indigenous people who survived and resisted colonization, knowing that our mutual survival and well-being now depend upon recovering wisdom that Indigenous cultures still carry, wisdom derived from being wild, a part of the land rather than apart from it. So I'm really curious about what you mean by recovering wisdom, and how you would describe this wisdom derived from the wild.
Yes. Well, I have to say, first, I think about relationships I've been blessed with Indigenous people, both here in this country and in other countries. And the fact that they were first, that very often people stole their land, which often meant they were banished to other lands where it was even harder to live. I mean, this pattern is so common around the world. And that even in those places where they were deprived of homelands, but then had to, in a sense, find a way to survive in less hospitable lands, it almost has deepened their wisdom in this, and deepened their, and in a sense, it hasn't made them say, I really want to join the colonizing project, because they see its ugliness. They see what it's doing from the bottom, so to speak, So the first thing I have to say is, I think those of us who get the privilege of having relationships with Indigenous people, we need to revere the wisdom we receive from them and find ways to pass it on. I think we have to remember there are so many more colonizers than descendants of the colonizers than descendants of the colonized, that this can create the sense of colonizers who want to all go find their own private teacher among the descendants of the colonized, which can be another act of oppression in a certain sense, as if people exist just to teach the rest of us lessons. There's a kind of reclaiming homework that we have to do. And often what that means is being willing to not bother people, but to learn what we can from what they've written, or learn what we can from observing them from a respectful distance. When I moved to Southwest Florida, where I live, where we have several different sort of lineages of people called the Seminole and the Miccosukee and others, because of my relationships with indigenous people in other parts of the country, I really hoped I'd be able to establish relationships with people near where I live. And what I've learned is they've had so many horrible, bad experiences. For me to expect to show up and then be happy to see me and be willing to trust me, I realize is terribly unrealistic and uncharitable on my part. So what that means, I think, is we all try to learn what we can from a respectful distance, and when we're invited in closer, to cherish that as a treasure that it is. But the good news is, people like Randy Woodley, who's known to many of us, and the late Richard Twiss, who's a dear friend and someone who made a huge mark in my life, or even I think of the writer Robin Wall Kimmerer and her amazing books. I just think we live at a time where so much of that wisdom is going to be given to us. If I were to think, if any of you are familiar with Mark Charles, a Navajo man of Christian faith, but who is struggling at the center of these connections. Oh my goodness, I've learned so much from him. And a poet and writer like Caitlin Curtis, who in many ways in recent years has begun to rediscover her own Potawatomi heritage and learn how to celebrate that. I just think it would be smart for all of us can read books and listen to people's words that they've made available. And that's a great start. And it's a respectful start.
Our common friend, Randy Woodley, has a really intriguing idea that I think offers a way, into that learning place. And he would say that what we can learn from indigenous people is how to recover our own indigeneity, right? Because we all come from a place where we were connected at one time, in our sort of ancestral line. So where is where did we lose that indigeneity, and how can we get past that point to rediscover it? So he would say that indigenous folks, capital I, model for us what that looks like to still live connected to the land.
Yes.
We're not to appropriate that model, but it inspires us to then say, what does this mean for me to love the land, to belong to the land, to listen to the land?
That strikes me as so wise, because very often it's not imitating behavior that gets us where we need to go. It's imitating desire, or it's imitating a value. And the fact is, the world is a different place than it was 50 years ago or 100 years ago. And what even the word wild, you could make a case that, it's very hard to find a wild place anymore on the earth. There, thank God, there are some that are less spoiled than others, less desecrated than others. But this is going to be a moving target, and it's going to continue to be that way. And so I think that reminds us that there's a recovery element of this, but there's also a creative element, and it's the desire for reconnection that will help us, that will motivate us to recover what can be recovered and to create new ways of living as and with and in the earth that we're going to all need.
Amen to that.
Yeah, and those little those reconnections can be very very intimate, small steps. It can be with a tree in your yard. It can be with a spider in your shower. Yes. It's like we are part of the wild. Like humans are part of the wild. All of our buildings are part of the wild. Like just to reframe that and to intentionally establish kindred relationship with particular others, which I know is part of your journey.
Yes.
I was thinking maybe as one of the last questions, or the last question, I think we're almost out of time. Is there a particular kindred relationship that you've established with, I know you've talked about the turtles, the tortoises, but is there a particular story of a kindred relationship that really expanded this sense of sacred relationship for you?
Oh my, there are so many. There are so many because I one of the things I love about, just being alive is that there's always more to learn and new connections to make. But I'll just tell you from today. So here I am in this room that is in my brother-in-law's home, and let's see, 6 feet from me is a window, and 2 feet on the other side of the window is a robin's nest. And I live in Florida now, where we don't have robins. We live in sandy soil. There's nowhere that they could get the food that they eat. And I miss robins, and I love the robin song, even though it's one of the most common songs. It just always makes me happy. And and I've been sitting here doing podcasts and other interviews all day, many, many hours. I've been sitting here and I've been watching her build her nest, and she comes with a mouthful of grass and she weaves it in. And it's just been a great day watching this happen. And I've never been able to witness a nest building from this eye level vantage point so close. And I never noticed how so much of her building is scrunching her body down and using the shape of her body to actually shape the nest, because it's her body that's going to be there protecting the eggs and so on. And then at the end of the day, just before it got dark, I saw a sparrow. She was out gathering more materials, and a sparrow came in and stole a bunch of her grass. I just thought, I'm even being able to see a little bit of mischief going on here.
What a gift of having to sit behind a computer all day.
It's just a gift right outside my window.
Beautiful. Thank you.
So, I just think, this was my brother or sister Robin at the window here today. And so this is a gift just right today.
I just want to jump in on the metaphor of the robin's body making a home for the robin, and thinking again about what it means to stay in Christianity, and how we've not necessarily made an institution that has space for our bodies, and to use our bodies to build a home that's more capable of holding us spiritually.
Thank you. That's so beautiful.
Really,
and I think that's a freedom that we need to receive. And one of the consequences for me of writing this book, I have to say this, I'm not happy about this, I'm not sad about it, it's just an observation, is that the kind of magic of Christian authority structures has really dissipated for me. I've lost my, it's not that I have disdain for all these great figures that we all study and learn about. It's just that I see them as people, and they were doing the best they can, and they made a lot of mistakes. And the magic is really gone. But here's the interesting thing about that. Part of the magic was not allowing me to be a full member of the community and shape the nest to fit me. And so in a sense, maybe their imperfections and their failures, part of that is the gift to all of us to say, okay, it's time for us to not just do what they said and did, and not just complain about what they said and did, but to actually do and say some things that are what are needed for this moment.
Yes, start weaving our own grass.
That's it.
Well, I'm sure we could go on and on tonight with this conversation, but unfortunately, that's all the time we have. Thanks to Kate, to Victoria, and especially to you, Brian, for taking time to be with us. Thanks to all our listeners all over the world, and we hope that you will take away inspiration and new vision from our time together.
And I want to say thanks to all of you for this good work you're doing, and for all the folks who care. This is important, and I'm honored to be part of it. Thank you.
We've been in conversation with Kate Davis of the Center for Transforming Engagement, Victoria Loorz of the Wild Church Network, and Brian McLaren about his book, Do I Stay Christian? For more information about any of our guests and the good work that they do, please see the show notes for this episode on the podcast website. If you appreciate this podcast and want to help us expand its global reach, please share this episode with a friend. You can also show your support by subscribing. Just go to whatever platform you listen to podcasts on and hit the subscribe or follow button for the Earthkeepers podcast. Finally, it would be very helpful if you could leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher. I'm Forrest Dinsley, your podcast host. Our executive producer is James Amadon. Our producer is Dave Olfers. Forrest Reed is our editor and the creator of our original music. Our research assistant is Rochelle Nordman, and Jesselyn Gentry is our social media director. Thank you, friends, for listening. Please join us for our next conversation on the Earthkeepers podcast.